You are tired in a way that sleep no longer seems to touch. It is a bright cold morning in a prosperous town in the year 1880, and you are a person of some standing, respectable and well-dressed, and you have come, as many people of your sort come, to the chemist's shop on the corner, because you have not felt like yourself in weeks. Your appetite has gone thin. Your nerves feel frayed and slack at the same time. There is a heaviness in your limbs and a fog behind your eyes, and the doctors have a fashionable word for it, and everyone you know seems to be suffering from some version of it. This weakness, this nervous exhaustion, this simple, grinding failure of the body to feel strong and alive. And you are tired of it, and you want to feel like a person again. And the chemist, who is a serious and respectable man in a clean apron behind a counter of gleaming glass and polished brass, nods gravely as you describe it, because he has heard it 100 times, and he reaches without hesitation for a particular bottle on the shelf behind him. It is a tonic, a nerve tonic, he tells you, a restorative, a stimulant, the very thing for a run-down constitution and a flagging appetite and tired nerves. It is prescribed by the finest physicians. It is taken by gentlemen and ladies of the first quality. It sharpens the mind and firms the nerve and gives back the vigor that hard work and modern life have worn away. And he measures out a small, careful dose into a glass and hands it to you, and you drink it down, and it works. That is the thing you must understand from the very first breath of this story. It works. Within minutes, a bright, clean, electric feeling spreads through you. The fog lifts. Your senses seem to sharpen, as if someone has turned up the light in the room. Your reflexes feel quicker. Your limbs feel lighter and readier. Your heart beats with a firm new confidence, and a sense of alertness and capability and simple, vigorous life comes flooding back into a body that had felt half asleep for weeks. You feel, for the first time in a long time, powerful, and you thank the chemist, and you buy a bottle to take home, and you resolve to take a little every day, because at last, you have found the thing that makes you feel alive. Now hold that bright morning in your mind. Hold that gleaming counter and that small, careful dose, and that flooding sense of sharpened, electric, wonderful vitality, because I have to tell you what was actually in that glass. I have to tell you the ordinary name of the substance that gave you that clean, electric surge of life. It was a poison. It was, quite specifically and quite famously, the poison people used to kill rats. And I have to tell you why the very thing that made it feel so wonderful was the exact same thing that made it able to kill you. Let me step in here before we go any further, because this one is a genuine marvel of a story, and I want to lay it out for you carefully, because the whole lesson of it lives in a single razor-thin line. My name is Hollis. For the better part of 40 years, I earned my living as a pathologist, and then as a coroner, which is to say I was the man who was called when a body arrived with a question still attached to it, and somebody, the family, or the police, or the court, needed that question answered plainly and without flinching. That was my trade, to look at the thing everyone else looked away from, slowly and without horror, and to tell the exact truth about it. And in a long career of doing that, I learned to have a particular respect and a particular wariness for the substances that a small change in quantity turns from a tonic into a corpse. And there is no better example in the whole history of medicine than the one I want to give you today, because it is so perfectly, so cleanly, so almost unbelievably balanced on that single edge. Most of the cures I tell you about on this channel failed because they did nothing, or because they were built on some piece of nonsense that a moment's clear thought should have exposed. This one is different, and I want you to hold on to that difference because it is the whole point. This cure was not nonsense. It genuinely worked. It did precisely what it promised to do. And that, and I mean this exactly, is what made it one of the most dangerous things a person could put in their body. But before I take another step, let me be as clear as I am always careful to be. Everything I am about to tell you is history. It is old, closed, finished history, and there is not one word of advice in any of it. Nothing here is a recommendation, or a method, or a suggestion about your health, and there are no instructions in it of any kind. This is not a how-to. I am not going to tell you doses, and where I mention quantities at all, it is only to make you feel how impossibly narrow the margin was, never as a measurement of anything. This is the careful account of a real thing that real, intelligent, respectable people really did, more than a century ago, in a world that had run clean out of better ideas. So please, take nothing here as guidance, take it only as history, and as a warning about something much larger than one bottle, to understand why an intelligent, respectable person would happily swallow a measured dose of rat poison every morning, and pay good money for the privilege, and feel wonderfully improved by it. You have to understand the world they were standing in, and what medicine could and could not honestly do for a tired body in that age. The 1800s were a century that ran on exhaustion. The cities were growing at a furious pace. The work was long and grinding, and a great many people, and especially the comfortable, striving, professional classes, felt themselves worn down by the sheer, relentless pace of modern life. There was even a fashionable diagnosis for it, a catch-all name that doctors gave to this constellation of tiredness and frayed nerves and low spirits and general depletion. And it became almost an epidemic of the age, a respectable and even a slightly glamorous thing to suffer from. To be run down, to be nervous, to be weak, to lack vigor and appetite and vitality, was one of the great complaints of the century. And beyond the merely tired, there were the genuinely afflicted, people weakened by long illness, people struggling with certain forms of paralysis and nerve damage, people whose bodies had simply stopped answering the way they should. And I want you to understand how heavy that word, weakness, sat upon a person in that century, because it was not the small complaint it might sound like now. To be weak was to be failing at the whole demand of the age, which was to work, and to endure, and to press on without complaint. A man who could not summon his vigor felt himself slipping, in his own eyes and in the eyes of everyone around him, out of the ranks of the capable. A woman worn thin by the endless labor of a household felt the same. So the desire for a restorative was not vanity. It was something closer to desperation, a wish to be returned to the person you were before the tiredness took you, to feel once more that you could meet the day and master it. That is the ache this whole trade was built to answer, and it is worth naming honestly, because it is an ache we still know very well. And into all of that came a hunger, a deep and universal and entirely understandable hunger, for something, anything, that would restore a person to strength. That would give back the vigor and firm up the nerves and sharpen the failing mind and bring the appetite roaring back and make a depleted body feel powerful and alive again. It is one of the oldest cravings human beings have. We want a tonic. We want a thing we can take that will make us feel strong. And that craving, I want you to notice, is not a stupid one or a shameful one. It is one of the most natural desires there is, to want to feel vividly, capably, powerfully alive. Keep that hunger in your mind honestly and without judgment, because everything that follows was built directly on top of it. And here is the trouble. Real medicine in that age had almost nothing honest to offer that hunger. There was no genuine, safe, reliable pick-me-up. There was no honest tonic that truly restored a tired body. So people turned in their millions to what they could buy over a counter, cheaply, without a doctor, wrapped in confident promises. They turned to the great, booming, almost entirely unregulated trade in tonics and stimulants and restoratives. And at the very center of that trade, respected by the finest physicians and sold in the finest chemists, sat one of the most remarkable substances ever to be called a medicine. It came from a seed, a hard, flat, disc-shaped, intensely bitter seed, from a tree that grows in the East, a tree the botanists call Strychnos nux-vomica. And inside that seed is a powerful chemical, an alkaloid, and the alkaloid has a name that has echoed through the history of crime and poison for 200 years. Strychnine. Now you may already know that name, and if you do, you almost certainly know it in one context and one context only. Poison. Strychnine is one of the most notorious poisons in the world, and it earned that reputation honestly. For a very long time, its great everyday, practical, household use was the killing of vermin. It was rat poison. It was the thing you put down to destroy the rats and the vermin, a reliable, potent, deadly killer, and everyone knew it as such. This is not a substance whose danger was hidden or obscure. Its lethality was its entire public reputation. It was, plainly and famously, a poison for killing animals. And here is where this story becomes something stranger and more unsettling than almost any other I have told you. Because that very same substance, that very same strychnine, the very same alkaloid from the very same bitter seed that a person would buy to kill the rats in the cellar, was, at the same time in the same century, in tiny, carefully subtoxic doses, one of the most respected and widely prescribed medicines of the age. Not a fringe remedy, not a back-alley quackery, a tonic recommended by serious doctors, dispensed by serious chemists, taken by respectable people, and folded into any number of patent medicines and formal pharmaceutical preparations, including well-known ones, such as the compound remedy that went by the name of Easton syrup. It was given as a nerve tonic and a general stimulant to lift the rundown and the exhausted. It was given to sharpen a flagging appetite and to aid a sluggish digestion. It was given for weakness and for fatigue and for nervous depletion and even, hopefully, for certain forms of paralysis, in the belief that a substance which so powerfully stimulated the nerves might rouse a body that had gone slack and still. And the astonishing thing, the thing that makes this whole story turn, is that it was not simply a delusion. In the doses they used, it did something. It really, truly did. Because the marketing of strychnine as a tonic was, in its way, a masterpiece, and it did not need to lie the way so many patent medicines lied. And that is exactly what made it so persuasive. It did not have to promise a miracle it could not deliver. It promised vigor, and it delivered a sensation that genuinely felt like vigor. It promised alertness, and the person who took it genuinely felt sharper. It promised to firm the nerves and restore vitality, and the body, flooded with the drug, obligingly produced a vivid, unmistakable feeling of exactly that. Picture the advertisements and the recommendations and picture the whole confident world of the nerve tonic. Strong words, vitality, vigor, energy, nerve. A restorative for the brain worker and the overtaxed constitution. The tired professional man restored to sharpness. The delicate patient given back their strength. The whole message was one of power reclaimed, of a depleted body made electric and capable again. And crucially, because a small dose really did produce that bright, alert, quickened sensation, the promise appeared to prove itself the moment you took it. You did not have to take it on faith and wait for a slow, doubtful improvement. You felt it work immediately in your own body the very first time. And nothing on this earth sells a remedy like a remedy that appears to work at once. A medicine that does nothing has to hide behind vague promises and slow timescales, but a tonic that floods you with an instant, unmistakable feeling of sharpened, electric vitality needs no such cover. It recommends itself in the plainest possible terms from the very first dose. And that is why strychnine, the rat poison, became one of the most trusted tonics of the age. Not because people were fooled into imagining an effect that was not there, but because the effect was gloriously, genuinely, dangerously there. Because I have to state the inversion at the black heart of this story now, as plainly as I possibly can, and I want you to sit with it, because it is one of the most important and least comfortable ideas in the whole history of medicine. Strychnine was not quackery. It was not an inert nothing dressed up in bold claims. It genuinely stimulated the nervous system. In a small, sublethal dose, it really did produce a heightened state of alertness, a genuine sharpening of the reflexes, a real and physical sense of quickened, electric vitality. The tonic worked. And here is the terrible hinge of the whole thing. The precise mechanism that produced that wonderful feeling of aliveness was the exact same mechanism, unchanged, undiluted, identical, that killed the rats in the cellar. There were not two different actions, a gentle helpful one at a low dose and a separate deadly one at a high dose. There was one action, one single thing the molecule does to a nervous system, and a sliver more of it was death. Think about what that means. The same substance doing the same thing to the same nerves was a tonic and a poison, and the only difference between the two, the entire difference, was a hair's breadth of quantity. The thing that made you feel vividly alive and the thing that killed the rat were not cousins. They were not even siblings. They were the identical substance, the identical action, separated by nothing but a sliver of dose. It worked. And that, exactly and precisely that, is what made it so lethal. Because a remedy that does nothing can at least be taken in error without harm. But a remedy whose helpful dose sits a whisker away from its fatal one is a loaded thing to keep in the house, and to swallow every morning, and to nudge upward just a little, on the days you feel especially tired. And now you can see the catastrophe that lived inside it, and I am going to describe it soberly, and briefly, and without dwelling on it, because it is not something I will turn into spectacle, but you have to understand plainly what the poison did in order to understand the size of the risk. When strychnine is taken in a dose that crosses the line, it does something terrible and unmistakable. It strips the nervous system of its restraint. The muscles, robbed of the signal that tells them to relax, seize into violent, uncontrollable convulsions, the whole body arching rigid, the muscles locking, and because the muscles that drive breathing lock along with all the rest, the body can no longer draw breath. Death comes by asphyxiation, the person conscious and aware while the convulsions run their course. It is, by every account, one of the more dreadful ways to die, and I will leave the description there, because that is enough for you to grasp what was sitting one small measure away from that pleasant morning tonic. And here is the part that turns the blood cold. The gap between a dose that gave a pleasant lift and a dose that killed was razor thin. The therapeutic window, as the pharmacologists would come to call it, the space between a helpful amount and a lethal one, was tiny, one of the tightest of any substance ever used as a medicine. And into that tiny, tiny margin fell a great many people. Accidental poisonings were common, a slightly generous dose, a preparation stronger than the last, an error at the chemist's counter, a patient who, feeling that the tonic had stopped biting quite so brightly as before, decided to take a little more to be sure of the effect and stepped, without knowing it, across the invisible line. There was no wide, forgiving margin to protect them. There was a razor's edge, and the same drug that had made them feel powerful was waiting on the other side of it. And there is a darker use still, which I will name because it is part of the true history. A poison this potent, this available, and this able to masquerade as a respectable medicine, was a gift to those who wished to kill deliberately. Strychnine became a favored instrument of the Victorian poisoner. The most notorious of them, a physician of all things, a man named Thomas Neill Cream, used it to murder, hiding his killings behind exactly the medical respectability that the drug enjoyed. That a doctor used the tonic poison to kill is, when you think about it, the whole grim paradox of this story wearing a human face. The medicine and the murder weapon were the same bottle. So let me now give you the two things that anchor this story in solid, documented fact, because I never ask you to take my word for the shape of a thing. The first is the pharmacology, which we now understand with precision, and which explains everything you have heard. The second is a single, astonishing, thoroughly documented event, in which the whole paradox of strychnine played out in front of a stadium of witnesses. First, the science, and it is beautiful in its clarity. Your nervous system does not only send signals to make muscles fire, it also, constantly, sends signals to make them stop, to hold them back, to keep them from firing all at once. It runs, in other words, on brakes as much as on an accelerator. And one of the chemical messengers that applies those brakes, that carries the signal that says calm, hold, relax, is a small molecule called glycine. Now here is what strychnine does, and it is the entire secret of the drug. Strychnine is what the pharmacologists call a glycine-receptor antagonist. In plain words, it blocks the brakes. It sits in the place where the calming signal should land, and it stops that signal from being heard. It removes the nervous system's restraint. And now every single thing about strychnine falls into place. Remove a little of the restraint and the nervous system runs hot and bright. The reflexes quicken, the senses sharpen, and a person feels that electric, alert, powerful vitality, the tonic effect. Remove too much of the restraint, and there is nothing left to stop the muscles from firing all at once into the locked, arching, breathless convulsion that kills. It is the same action, the removal of the same brakes, all the way along. The tonic and the poison are one continuous thing. There is no line in the drug itself between medicine and death. The only line is the dose. And now the second anchor, the documented event, and it is one of the strangest true stories in the whole history of sport. The year is 1904. The place is the Olympic Games, held that year in the American city of St. Louis. And the event is the marathon, run in brutal heat over dusty roads. One of the leading runners is a man named Thomas Hicks. And as the race grinds on, and Hicks begins to fail and flag and beg to be allowed to stop, his own handlers, the men running alongside him, do something that tells you everything about how strychnine was understood in that age. They dose him. During the race, to keep him moving, they give him strychnine, mixed with brandy and with egg white as a stimulant to drive his exhausted body onward. And it drove him onward. Hicks kept moving, glassy and staggering, more dead than alive by the accounts of those who saw him, and he crossed the line first, and he won the Olympic marathon. And he very nearly died in the doing of it and had to be carried from the course and revived. He had been given, deliberately, during a feat of extreme exertion, a dose of the rat poison as a performance enhancer, and it worked, in the sense that it pushed a collapsing man across a finish line, and it very nearly killed him in exactly the same act. It is one of the first clearly documented episodes of doping in the history of sport, and it is the whole story of strychnine in a single afternoon. The thing that gave him the power to go on was the thing that almost stopped his heart. The tonic and the poison, once again, were one. And I want you to sit with the fact that the men who dosed him were not villains and were not fools. They were doing what the best understanding of their day told them to do. Strychnine was a respectable stimulant, prescribed by physicians, believed to rouse a flagging body. And here was a flagging body in the most public possible way. A man collapsing before a crowd with a race still to run. They reached for the tonic of the age, exactly as a chemist would have reached for it across a counter, and they gave it to a man pushing himself to the very edge of what a body can survive, and they very nearly killed him with the same gift that carried him home. Nobody in that story meant harm. That is what makes it worth telling. The harm did not come from cruelty or ignorance. It came from a thing that genuinely worked, used by people who trusted it precisely because they had watched it work. And this is where I turn away from that stadium and that chemist's counter and turn, gently, to you. Because I did not walk you through all of this so that you could shake your head at the foolishness of the past and feel safe and superior in the present. That would be the easy reaction, and it would be the wrong one, and it would let you off far too lightly. There is a line, more than 400 years old now, from a physician often called Paracelsus. That is the oldest and truest principle in the whole of pharmacology, and this entire story is only that one line, written in a bottle. The dose makes the poison. Nothing is safe or dangerous in itself. Everything depends on the amount. The most healing substance in the world will kill you past a certain quantity, and the deadliest poison in the world can, below a certain quantity, do something a person genuinely wants. There is no bright, clean line in nature between medicine and poison. There is only the dose and how close to the edge it sits. And here is the thing I would like to leave gently under your skin, because it is not a mistake that belongs only to the past. Look again at what that person at the counter was really chasing. They were tired, and they wanted to feel strong. They wanted vigor and sharpness and vitality and the vivid electric sense of being powerfully, capably alive. That is not a Victorian craving. That is a human one, and it is exactly as strong in you and in me as it was in them. We still, all of us, reach for the thing that promises to make us feel powerful and alert and sharper and stronger and more alive. And when a thing delivers that feeling immediately, unmistakably in our own bodies, we are apt to trust it completely and to want a little more of it and to stop asking the one question that actually matters. Because our hunger for anything that makes us feel powerful very rarely stops to ask how close the edge is. That is the quiet, human failing this whole story turns on. Not stupidity, not ignorance. A perfectly reasonable person, chasing a perfectly reasonable feeling, taking a thing that genuinely delivered it, and never once pausing to ask how thin the margin was between the feeling they wanted and the harm they did not see. The strychnine worked. It really did make them feel alive. And that is precisely, exactly, why it was so dangerous. The things that make us feel most powerful are so often the things we are least willing to measure. And that is exactly what I would love to hear from you down in the comments, because I do read them, everyone. Here are my 2 questions, and I mean them plainly. First, before today, had you ever heard of this? That strychnine, the poison people used to kill rats, was for the better part of a century a respected tonic and stimulant, prescribed by serious doctors, and even given to an Olympic marathon runner in the middle of his race. And second, and this is the one I most want to know, what is the thing in your own life right now that makes you feel powerful or sharp or alive, that you reach for a little more of without ever once stopping to ask how close the edge might be? I am genuinely curious what you will say, because I suspect every one of us has an answer, and I suspect most of us would rather not look at it too closely. A young colleague of mine, a gentle, squeamish soul I will call Toby, who goes a delicate shade of green at the mildest of my stories, and whom I keep close by precisely, because he reminds me not to grow a shell over all of this, asked me, when I first told him about the strychnine tonics, how anyone could possibly have swallowed rat poison and called it medicine. And I told him the truth, which is that they swallowed it precisely because it worked, because it genuinely made them feel wonderful, and that this is exactly the kind of thing that fools clever people, not foolish ones. An old head nurse I worked beside for many years, a woman who had genuinely seen everything and been rattled by none of it, used to say that the substances she feared most were never the ones that felt like poison going down. They were the ones that felt like strength. She was right, of course. She usually was. For my part, I will keep doing what old coroners do, which is telling you the true and careful reasons behind the things we would rather not look at too closely, one story at a time, with respect for everyone in them and no false comfort at the end. If you would like to sit in on the next one, and there are a great many of these stories still to tell, then do subscribe, and I will keep them coming. This has been the story of strychnine, of the bitter seed and the deadly alkaloid, of the rat poison that was sold and prescribed and trusted as a tonic to make a tired body feel gloriously, electrically alive, and of the razor-thin sliver of dose that was all that ever stood between the feeling of power and the fact of death. Remember the oldest rule there is: the dose makes the poison, and be a little more curious than feels entirely comfortable about the things in your own life that make you feel most alive, and about how close to the edge they sit. My name is Hollis. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you at the next one.